It's my pleasure and privilege to be here tonight. Fudan School of Management is renowned as the finest, most famous business school in all of China. And as such, Fudan has a very important responsibility. The school is incubating the next generation of leadership for the Chinese economy. And the Chinese economy is going to be the major driver of the global economy for the 21st century. Now that's the same role that my country's economy played in the 20th century. Fudan's importance, though, goes well beyond just business. I believe that the Sino-US relationship is the single most important bilateral relationship in the world. And the quality of that relationship will go a long way towards defining how our world deals with its perils and its problems in the decades ahead. Now, I also have a selfish agenda for being here tonight. Our company puts a major emphasis on creating relationships with the world's most important universities. I will speak tonight about the importance of talent recruitment and talent development in running a global business. But we are very proud that in 2013, we will be launching a partnership with Fudan, where we will take several students from the School of Management every year and train them at Tishman Speyer. And our hope is that some of these students become future leaders of our company, both in China and across our global platform. I think that's probably as good a place as any to start my remarks tonight. I want to speak about how we have created a global platform that is relatively unique in the real estate industry. Real estate is the quintessential local business. You can go to major cities across the world, whether here in China, in the United States, or elsewhere, and the real estate market in virtually every city is dominated by local entrepreneurs who do nothing but own, develop, and manage buildings in just that city. Now, our company was founded by my great-great-grandfather in 1897, more than a century ago, in New York City. And certainly, we could keep ourselves very busy by just doing real estate in New York. There are many profitable opportunities. But we made a decision to go global. And I'll tell you why. The fact that real estate is such a local business, and the fact that real estate has been nearly immune to globalization, has resulted in a very interesting dynamic. There is a dramatic discrepancy in the quality of buildings as you go around the world. There is no single standard for how buildings, especially office buildings, are developed and operated. And I'll give you, to me, the most poignant example of that. Brazil, as we all know, has had an extraordinary decade of growth, of GDP growth, of wealth creation, of a burgeoning middle class. And yet, when you go to the two most important cities in Brazil, Sao Paulo and Rio, you'll notice something that is very odd. Nearly half of the office buildings in both of those cities don't have air conditioning. What does that mean? Well, in Rio today, it's going to be 95 degrees. Imagine conducting an important business meeting in an office building, where in a room without air conditioning, it's probably going to be well over 100 degrees. Not a very good way to make a sale in business. And the issues, the quality issues in Brazil are typical of many markets around the world. The result of this is that multinational companies have a very hard time enforcing a single standard of office occupancy in different markets. And it has been a source of great frustration to business executives running multinational companies. And at this point, literally every Fortune 500 company has a global footprint. So every Fortune 500 company is struggling with this challenge. And that is the opportunity for Tishman Speyer. So the question is, how have we evolved from a New York City company into a global company? And tonight I want to talk about the various strategies we've used to accomplish that goal. It starts with talent. That is the absolute most important ingredient in our success. And if we're going to compete with the best local entrepreneurs in every market, we're going to have talent that's just as good at business and just as good at understanding the local market as that local entrepreneur. We realized about a dozen years ago that was going to require a fundamentally different approach to human resources than any other real estate company in the world. To meet that challenge, we hired 2 executives from McKinsey, which is a global consulting firm, and we asked them to create a talent department that would do nothing but recruit and develop the best and brightest from universities around the world. I was actually the experiment for that program, because when I joined the company in 1995, there was no training program, so we created one. And I rotated through different departments in the company, learned every aspect of our business, and rotated through several projects in order to evolve myself as a real estate executive. So we used that program as the template for this training program for business school graduates. I'm very proud to say that a dozen years later, the initial trainees have now become senior executives in our company. And as an example, Ryan Botcher, who's here this evening, and who is the CEO of our China business, was part of that first class of trainees. Our CEO of our New York City business and the CEO of our Washington, D.C. business are also graduates of that program. And I would expect in the years ahead that our company's senior management is filled with people who went through that program. Another important characteristic of how we develop our talent is to hire locally. We are competing, as I said, in the quintessential local business, which means that in China, we have to be a Chinese company. And in India, we're an Indian company, and in Brazil, we're a Brazilian company. And so we put a great emphasis on hiring local talent. In China, we have 180 people, and 178 of them are from this region. In Brazil, every single employee is Portuguese speaking, and in India, every single employee is Indian. Now, the result of that is that we have intense local participation, but we weave our offices together by having a very strong corporate culture. And that corporate culture starts with the ethic of teamwork. And so we combine the best practices that we've learned globally with our very intense focus on having local teams. And this corporate culture of ours has resulted in an extraordinary retention rate that is at the top of our industry. And so it is very common to find people at Tishman Speyer who've spent their entire career at the company. And we encourage that in a very strong way. It's by having top talent that we've been able to create a single standard of office buildings, both how we develop buildings and how we operate buildings all over the world. It's not enough to build a great building in New York or London. We hold our buildings in Shanghai, in Mumbai, in Rio, in Frankfurt to the same global standard. There are no favorites. Now, how do you do that? I'll tell you how we've done that here in China. We were very fortunate to develop Goldman Sachs' world headquarters in New York. And I think it's fair to say that that building is one of the most technologically sophisticated in the world. We completed that building in 2010, and we sent the gentleman who was responsible for the project to move to China. And we partnered him with a Chinese executive who was responsible for developing Plaza 66 here in Shanghai, which I think, we didn't develop it, but I think it's fair to say it's one of the finest office buildings in the country. And that partnership between a U.S. executive and a Chinese executive is allowing us to deliver buildings here that will be at the same standard as if we were building in Midtown Manhattan. One very important aspect of our global development standard is a strong emphasis on sustainability. I'm very proud of the fact that we have been pioneers in developing sustainable buildings in the United States. And we've learned that sustainability is not just good citizenship, it's also good business. Many of the sustainable techniques that we use have a very fast payback, and more importantly, many of the world's most famous companies will only go in buildings that follow a sustainable criteria. But it's not enough for us to do sustainability within our borders in the US or within Europe. We use the same standard of sustainability in Brazil, in China, in India. Again, one global standard. I'll tell you one example of how that's worked for us. Down in Brazil, we developed the first LEED Gold building in the entire southern hemisphere. And in that building, we created a cogeneration plant, which means that that building is 100% energy self-sufficient. We create our own power. Now, when we finished that building, something unexpected and unacceptable happened, which is that certain areas of the building were providing more cool air than we expected, and certain parts of the building were creating too little cool air, and the building was not air conditioned properly. So we sent our engineering team from Rockefeller Center, which has probably the most sophisticated air conditioning system of any property in the world. And we sent them down to Sao Paulo to figure out what the problem was. They discovered that the tenant had originally delivered us a design, which we used as the basis of designing the air conditioning system. But as they were building, they changed their design. So our team readjusted the air conditioning system, and the outcome was that we cut energy usage in the building by 40%. That is the very definition of sustainability. we are holding our China business to the same standard, and we were very proud that our office building recently completed in Chengdu is a LEED Gold building. Our office building just a couple of kilometers away that we're developing for Nike is a LEED Gold office building, and we plan on creating a new standard of sustainability for the Chinese market. Anybody in real estate knows that it's one thing to develop a great building, but it's a very different challenge to operate a great building. And it's not uncommon to find an office building that was finished 5 years ago and looks like it's 30 years old because it hasn't been maintained well. And that leads to not just physical depreciation of an asset, but also financial depreciation of the asset. So at Tishman Speyer, just like we hold ourselves to one global standard of development, we have the same concept in terms of property management. We have a single set of standard operating procedures that we issue to all of our buildings worldwide, and our property managers are expected to enforce. This does not always work perfectly in new markets. I'll tell you a story about a recent visit that I had to India. We developed a building in a city called Hyderabad, which is one of the technology capitals in India. This was a building designed by IMK's firm, I think one of the finest office buildings in India. We rented it to two very prestigious companies. And when I arrived at the building, I was greeted by the property manager, who is a former colonel in the Indian Army and a very smart, responsible guy. I was very excited to see how clean the building was, how professional the building workers were. When I went into the food court, it was extremely well ventilated. This building was operated very well. And the colonel wanted to take me upstairs to see a typical office floor. We went into the elevator, and it was a very pretty elevator cab. But when I turned around and I saw the metal trim around the elevator doors, there were several marks in the metal. And I asked the colonel, how is this happening? Where's our metal maintenance program? And he explained to me that he thought that it was a good idea to cut our operating costs by cutting back our metal maintenance program from our global standard. I explained to him that that simply wasn't the way that Tishman Speyer manages our buildings. He understood it completely. And I would venture to guess that today, that elevator cab is as well maintained as any in our global portfolio. A couple of months ago, I visited our new building in Chengdu, and this was an extremely proud moment because the building was immaculate. The security staff, extremely professional. The elevator, perfect. I would tell you that this building would compete with any building in Manhattan or the City of London or any market anywhere in the world. And it set the very standard that Tishman Speyer aspires to, which is to have one technique of running and building a building. And I think this office building will set a new standard for the city of Chengdu. The result of all this effort is that big companies around the world trust us. They know that if they do business with us anywhere in the world, we will take care of them, just as if they were in Rockefeller Center. And that's exactly what they're looking for. They want to know that if they're here in Shanghai, or they're in Rio, or they're in Delhi, that their workers are going to be taken care of by their landlord just as well as in their home country. Tell you a great example of this was our project here in the Yangpu district, just a couple of kilometers away. We recently completed the largest lease in Shanghai with Nike. Nike was a tenant of ours in New York City in the 1990s, and we developed a very strong relationship with them. They made a decision that they wanted to move from the center of Shanghai into a campus setting. They had many choices. They could have picked any developer in any location in Shanghai. They decided to pick us because they had very specific ideas about what they wanted their building to be like, and they knew that we would execute on what we promised. And this is going to be a very interesting building. They're putting a basketball court, a full-size basketball court in their lobby. So developing a building for Nike is going to be no small challenge, but they know that we will do what we say. And it's a picture-perfect example of how our relationships with major companies work across the world. What's fascinating in China is that this dynamic is quickly becoming two-way. And our relationships with Chinese companies are starting to pay very big dividends in other parts of the world. We recently signed leases with China Eastern Airlines and with CCTV to take office space in Rockefeller Center. And we've recently developed a building in Rio for China State Grid, and we're now running that building for them. I think that in 10 years, our relationships with Chinese companies are going to be just as important to our global success as our relationship with U.S. companies. And we're already starting to see that evolve. Our evolution as a global company has been a long journey. It actually started in the mid-1980s in Frankfurt. We were recruited by Citibank, a company that we've done business with since the 1950s. They and we decided we would build the first U.S.-style skyscraper in Germany. It was 257 meters. And the idea was we would build something that U.S. companies would be very comfortable locating in. The project was a big success. We landed Credit Suisse and Goldman Sachs as our anchor tenants, and the building's architecture became iconic and the landmark building of Frankfurt, and it still is. 257 meters would not be a tall building here in China. As I understand it, there are 13 buildings just in Shanghai that are taller than 257 meters, and my guess is it'll be 2,000 buildings in 3 years. And as I think about the challenge of operating specifically in China, it does present some challenges that are different than other markets where we've created businesses. One of those challenges is the sheer scale of the opportunity here. I have visited many cities in China, and I have yet to visit a city where I don't think we could have a successful high-quality project. But the way we develop is so specific and so demanding that we only take on the number of projects that we know we can execute with our standard of excellence. And so, while we're very happy with the pace of our growth, we're being measured and methodical about it, despite the fact that the scale of opportunity here is enormous, and I think bigger than anywhere else in the world. The other interesting challenge in China is that the domestic competition is getting stronger and stronger. There is nowhere where we do business where local developers are learning more quickly. The best evidence of how fast the learning curve is when you look at buildings that are completed today versus buildings that were completed here 5 or 7 years ago. The buildings that are being completed here are as good as any in the world. And that is a very new dynamic. And that is a real testament to how strong the domestic development community is. I have had the pleasure over the last couple of years getting to know Wang Shi, the founder of Venga. And that company has really set a terrific standard here for residential development. But I was fascinated when I went to visit their headquarters in Shenzhen. And I think it is as high quality an office project as any I've seen in the world, even though their specialty is residential. And I think that's very good evidence of how quickly the real estate standard here is improving and evolving. So you're going to have a lot of choices. Graduates from Fudan are going to have their pick of companies to work for. You're going to have opportunities to work for Chinese companies. You're going to have opportunities to work for U.S. companies like ours. That would be a great choice. You're going to have opportunities to work for Australian companies, European companies. And I would offer just some very simple advice. As you're thinking about your choices, ask yourself, does this company value talent? Does it value its people? Ask yourself, does this company have a real corporate culture? Are there values that bind the company together? And ask yourself, does this company have a vision? Does it have a sense of mission, a roadmap of where it wants to be in the future? And I would suggest that if you ask yourself those questions, you will steer yourself in the right direction. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.